if you can divide up and make compromises. But these days we even have sort of, gridlock over whether or not we will renew the debt limit. Okay, which is essentially saying that we're going to pay back the money we owe, that we've already appropriated. Okay? Now, I've argued that primaries in the general election are part of the problem, so let me suggest a solution that is being used in Alaska and I think has great promise. Essentially, it's a 2-round election. In some ways, it's similar to what you do here, but not. Okay, you can put that with they disagree because they disagree. It's similar yet not. Okay? You can write that on your exam as well. You want to get straight to that D grade. There you go. Okay, so in the first round, which is often called the primary, simply because we're used to calling the first round the primary. Okay. Do you do that here, or is the first round just called the first round? Or?
Primary.
Primary. Okay. And so all the candidates compete, much like here. You vote for one. Okay. In Alaska, the top 4 go on to the general election, not the top 2, the top 4. And the virtue of having the top 4 is that you can get a range of people. Okay. You've seen in Washington State how you sometimes get idiosyncratic results, right? Like, so the Republican who voted for Trump's impeachment got knocked out by a more right-wing Republican who then lost to the Democrat, right? Okay. Well, what you might have gotten instead under this system is like, because that, the Democrat, Trumpy Republican voted to impeach Trump and somebody else. Okay, and so you actually have kind of a range of choices, okay? And so then the second round is ranked choice voting. What does that mean? Well, once you get there, you essentially rank them, and in Australia, they do this simply by ranking 1, 2, 3, 4. Here, you color first choice, this person, second choice, this person, and so forth. And if someone gets a majority of the first choice votes, they win. Okay, otherwise, the lowest person is knocked out, and their votes are redistributed to whoever they pick second. Now, some ballots are exhausted by people, not because they're tired, but because people didn't cast a second choice. Okay, and so you keep going until someone has a majority of the votes that still exist. And the virtues of this are that, first of all, you have more choice. Okay, which in most general elections, like in my district, my district is an ultra-liberal district. Jamie Raskin is my congressman. Okay, but frankly, like you could have Kermit the Frog's evil twin on the Democratic ballot, and he would still win the election. Okay, Joe Biden could be dead on the Democratic ballot. Okay. So, and similarly, there's lots of Republican districts that are the same way. And so, what this sort of encourages people to do is, first of all, you want to reach out to other people's voters, because let's say you have your name on your shirt, so you lose. Let's say Mr. Phillips here, I'm running against Mr. Phillips, okay? And it's just me and him in the election. He's never really been in the Army. He's just wearing that uniform for fun. He evaded service in Afghanistan and Iraq. And,
we've always thought that about him.
Okay. Just smear away. However, if there's like 4 of us, and maybe you're one of the people I want to get votes from, maybe I'll say, let me say you're a voter, and you say, oh, I really like Phillips, and I say, oh yeah, I think he's great too. Maybe could you rank me second? So it encourages, first of all, more reaching out to other voters, okay? And so maybe I don't quite write you off the same way, okay? It also means maybe I slam him less, because if I slam him a lot, you're gonna say, boy, he's a nasty, mean person to the guy I like, so I'm not voting for that Lublin guy. He's a mean one, okay? My students could verify that, but, okay, and so there's also more kind of like, it gives you a sense, the first round gives you a sense of where people are and sort of how you can reach out. Now, it doesn't mean the far-right Trump Republican will reach out to the Democrats per se, but it does give sort of more incentive to reach toward the center. And indeed, that's exactly what happened in Alaska, where essentially, if you look at the first round here, is at the top, you had 3 candidates. Mary Peltola, who's a very moderate Democrat of Alaska Native origin. Sarah Palin, who you might have heard of, and Nick Begich, who's from a very prominent Alaska family. Okay. Now it turns out that of the three, Begich came in behind Palin and Peltola, so he was knocked out, and his votes were redistributed. Now, Begich is a very sort of mainstream conservative Republican, but for lack of a better term, doesn't have that sort of special Palin-esque wackiness. Okay, you have to realize, like, Palin has become a cordially disliked figure to about 60% of Alaskans, because not necessarily because of her right-wing politics, but because they feel like she quit being governor after 2 years and then ran away to make money in the lower 48, okay, which is sort of a cardinal sin in Alaska, as you can imagine. And so, where did Begich's votes go? Well, okay, the most went to Palin, which is a Republican, that makes sense, but Peltola got a lot too, and a bunch who didn't vote for either, which I must say could be quite sensible. Like I can't vote for a Democrat, but I just can't vote for Sarah Palin is not an irrational vote, okay? in my mind, okay? And so in the end, when you add it up, Peltola narrowly beat Sarah Palin, okay? And Peltola has been, along with the representative from Maine, who's also elected by ranked choice voting, the most centrist Democrats in Congress. Okay, I think there's a lot of Democrats who stereotype her as, oh, she's Alaska Native, she must be a big liberal, have like, what do you call those little circular things, you know, peace circles and whatnot. But in fact, she's pro-oil and she's pro-gun, which in Alaska you simply have to be, but she ran her campaign on being pro-fish, okay, because all Alaskans like fish, particularly salmon. Okay, and so protecting salmon and fish in Alaska is not a thing that divides Democrats and Republicans. Okay, and I can see, like most professors, I'm in severe danger of running over. Essentially, the same thing happened in the Lisa Murkowski election, and so you got, and she and Peltola, by the way, cross-endorsed each other. Okay, and that's kind of it. I'm done. Time for questions. Thank you for being such a patient audience.
Okay, we have about 25 minutes for questions. Maybe I'll start us off. I wonder if you could talk about what happened this year, the difference between the two parties, because at the beginning of the year, both parties had, at the top of their ticket, candidates who were deeply unpopular. One party got rid of their candidate, and the other party didn't. Why?
Well, the other party didn't because he actually they tried to, but Trump beat him all in the primaries. Biden ultimately, no one dared try in the end, which was kind of interesting. But then he was effectively given the heave-ho with a little help from Nancy Pelosi. I mean, frankly, the narrative is now taking place that, you know, he did this for love of country and country first. I think which is a nice narrative, and we should probably all run with, to be gracious. But if we are not being so gracious, we could say he was pushed out, and that's the reality, and he's now making the most of it. Okay, and you know, I mean, frankly, if you watch that first debate, you could see why he was pushed out. Okay, it was within 5 minutes. I'm like, this is a disaster of epic proportions. Okay, and after that, you know, they got him out. Jon Stewart made a joke when Trump keeps complaining about Biden being replaced, saying, well, you know, we'd allow you to replace your old guy too. But ultimately, Trump has a reason to hang on that's really great, which is he's running to stay out of jail. Okay, and to sort of stop all the court cases. Okay, that's what he's running for. So they're unable to. Also, the Republicans are now Trump's party. You know, I think the idea that it has become a real sort of personality cult is not unjustified. I mean, basically, if Donald Trump changes his mind on something tomorrow, they'll, you know, J.D. Vance will too. I mean, it's not unusual for politicians to run with people they've criticized. Okay, Kamala Harris, after all, had criticized Joe Biden at great length. But it's rare for someone who called the other guy Hitler to run with that, okay? And I think J.D. Vance is perfect for Trump because he's totally Trump's creation. Okay, I thought it would have been very smart for him to pick Tim Scott because he was starting to appeal to black voters, and this really would have helped even more. But Tim Scott isn't his creation. Did I get to your question somewhere in there?
Yeah. I mean, I wonder, is there something structural why Republicans are a cult of personality and Democrats actually acted like a real political party in the sense that they got rid of an unpopular candidate at the top? Is there anything structurally different in the two parties?
No, I think what this reflects is that our parties, we have a very candidate-centered system still, in the sense of, it's not like I'm the leader of the party and I say, you're going to run in Nebraska's 2nd district, okay? You're from Nebraska, too?
No.
Okay. We have some from Omaha here. And so it doesn't work like that. Essentially, if you want to run, you've got to go and run. And so it's a self-starter thing. So Trump managed to do that. And in some ways, I think he more authentically represented some of the themes the Republicans had been running on, but also was smart enough to realize that some of the things the Republicans had been running on maybe were less appealing. Okay, so he sort of runs on this sort of mixture. I mean, he talks about lowering taxes mainly for the wealthy, but also talks about protecting, all these things for working people. Whether or not he does it, I'll leave that for you to debate. But I think, he essentially captured the party in a way that, say, someone on the Democratic side to date has been less able to do. I mean, I don't think anyone could say the Democrats had a cult of personality around Joe Biden. Yeah.
I remember back in 2015 when that campaign for the presidency was just taking off, and I saw a news show that showed the Republican Party had raised about $400 million. I don't remember the exact amount, but the Koch brothers and their allies had raised $900 billion. Would you like to address Citizens United and the role of money and dark money? And
I mean, we basically now, the Supreme Court has more or less said, let the good times roll and anyone can give money to people. I think it's gotten to the point where it's unclear that if, like, you were a legislator on the, in Olympia, if I went to the floor and handed you money, that might or might not be illegal, okay? Which is sort of a sad case in a way. But, I think there's a lot and too much. It's sort of hard to limit money, particularly in our system, unless you repealed not just that, but also Buckley versus Vallejo, where essentially you can't stop people from spending money because it's free speech. At this point, there's so much money on both sides, I'm not sure it's quite as much as a problem, but it's all highly distressing. Increasingly, I think they're not quite sure what to do with it, because how many of you all watch like broadcast TV and watch the commercials in broadcast TV? Okay, 2 people. Okay, I'm older than all of you, and right? 90% of things I watch are on some subscription service, and if it's not, I just, like, the best way to watch the Olympics was, by DVRing it, right? You literally could watch 3 hours in about 1 hour, right? You could skip all the up close and personals. And so increasingly, I'm not sure they know what to spend it on, because TV commercials, which had stopped working even when we watched TV to a point, I'm not sure people even see them. So increasingly, you do it on the net and whatnot. But truth be told, I think the person who can emulate sort of what Barack Obama did, which is if you get people who you know to endorse them. Okay, so if like this young lady here, writes a poster, oh, I just love Kamala Harris, and shares it. That's likely to be much more influential with her friends than if, like, I'm the Kamala Harris person and pay for ads that they see. Okay, because then you're getting an endorsement from somebody. Okay, when I ran for office in my very tiny town, and someone held a coffee for me, which is just, meet and greet, and no one came. And she was feeling so sad. I said, no, this is all good, because essentially half the point of the coffee was you sending out a note saying you were inviting to meet me, which is essentially saying I endorse this guy. Okay, so, yeah, I see you were waiting to ask a question. No, you.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I was wondering what your prediction is for like a post-Trump Republican Party. Do you think that there's going, like, I guess JD Vance is going to be able to like captivate the Republican Party in the same way that he has, or do you think we're going to see them kind of start to shift maybe more back to something more centered?
It's an interesting question. First of all, we're not there yet.
Yeah.
Okay, Trump could easily win the election. But I think what we'd see more is a party that reflects sort of the issue positions he's taken. I will say, like, look, I disagree with lots of people on various policies and whatnot, but my ultimate real problem with today's Republican Party is not what they think about any issue, but that they seem willing to overturn elections, okay, and democracy. Okay, that's where I draw the line. So, like, I don't know that I agree with Liz Cheney on too much, maybe some on foreign policy, but she's now one of my heroes because she's been willing to sort of say, like, I'm an ultra-conservative, but this overthrowing election thing doesn't work for me. Okay, now there's some people who want to kind of write off all those people, but I in fact think you can have legitimate debates over immigration. You have legitimate debates over abortion. You have legitimate debates over the level of taxation and who money should be spent on, okay? And we can all believe our position is right. I think the best thing though is we realize that other people might have positions they feel are right too. And that part of our democracy is we can disagree with them, but respect them. And that ultimately we have to respect who wins. Okay? I mean, that's the whole thing. But this idea that we sort of call into question any election where we don't win, you know, that's not very American. Yeah.
Two questions. One is sort of a follow-up and one that's slightly unrelated. So in terms of follow-up, you're mentioning how, it seems like the Republican Party is pushing farther and farther right, and we've been asking these questions of how far right are they willing to go and what are the lines? I'm kind of wondering about what's going on in the Republican Party, because even when they controlled the House, the Senate, and had the presidency, they still had trouble passing their agenda because there was still so much gridlock and division. And so it's like, is there a point where the Freedom Caucus and so on is going to get pushed out? Are they going to be taking over? This is sort of just a follow-up on what do we think the future of the Republican Party is going to look like. And then my unrelated question is, you mentioned purity tests. You want to say a little bit more about what some of the purity tests might be for the future of the party?
Well, I mean, the Freedom Caucus has firmly believed that they could hold essentially the House hostage and the Republican Party hostage, and that unless you do what they want, they won't cast their votes and the bill will go down. The problem is there's two options. You either give in to them, but the problem is then there's a bunch of other Republicans who may not vote for the bill, or you do what in fact government usually requires, which is you come to some sort of compromise with the Democrats, which is in fact the feasible option, and is what repeatedly happened and then led to the defenestration of, I'm already forgetting his name, so McCarthy, that's right. He never as a man struggled so hard to get a position and then lost it. Well, actually, Liz Truss, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, has that one down. I think that occurs. You see that sometimes in Democratic primaries, though, too. You saw it even like during the Obama-Hillary primary, where they were both like, my healthcare plan is better than your healthcare plan. And it's like, one thing I love about Kamala Harris, okay, just simply as a form of art, she doesn't campaign on, Senate Bill 937 will really address this, okay? Because no one knows or gives a flying fill in the blank what Senate Bill 937 is, right? She talks about how we need more child care, okay? And debating that, that's something we all grasp, right? And the other thing is, under our system, Obama and Clinton could both have a health care plan, and then the first thing Congress does is put it in the shredder and writes their own, okay? Because Congress doesn't just do what the president wants. So, I think the problem is Republicans are prisoners of their primary electorates too, and I don't know how they get out of that so quickly. But I suspect what they'll do is you might see, someone like, to the extent they move back towards the center, it might be someone like Nikki Haley who, basically agrees with most of Trump's positions except on foreign policy, and does that. But there are real battles within the Republicans. The Republicans have traditionally been very pro-free trade. Trump is not very pro-free trade. So, this gentleman.
Thank you. Let me just challenge the thesis that the reason why the parties don't agree is because they disagree. So I think it was last year we had a speaker who talked about dog whistle kind of ideas or monikers. And so if you ask an average person, Republican and Democrat, do they feel that everybody should have access to good health care? The majority will say yes. But then if you ask, the same population, are you in favor of the Affordable Health Care Act? All of a sudden we start to see divisions. And the same can be made, on the other side. You can ask, the general population, do you believe in fiscal responsibility? Oh yeah, we all do. But then if you say, do you think we should balance the budget and cut out some social services? All of a sudden we get separation. So there's been the creation of some dog whistle kind of concepts that have divided people, not the basis of the concept itself. Does that make sense?
Yes and no. I mean, essentially what you're saying is if we ask people, do you like good things? They say, yes, we like good things. But then you ask them, do you approve of this way of getting the good thing? They get more divided.
Right.
Okay. And what you also point out, though, I think what you also nicely sort of get in there, the reverse, which most of us don't realize, is that, and most people are reluctant to admit, is our partisanship influences our views as much as our views influence our partisanship. Okay, and there's nothing like this more to see than, no one here except me is old enough to remember this, but Bill Clinton's unfortunate incident that almost led to him being impeached and thrown out.
Monica remembers it.
What? Yes, I'm sure she does, and she has suffered greatly for it through little fault of her own. But no, but I remember like Democrats at the time were sort of saying, "Oh, it's private, it doesn't matter, da 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 da." But had it been a Republican who'd done the exact same thing, they would have been outraged. This is sexual harassment. This is terrible. Blah, 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 blah. And so, a lot of it was highly situational. And I remember I wasn't the brightest assistant professor. I had an argument with the dean of my school. I had just arrived at American University. This was right when this was happening. And I argued what he did was wrong, but he shouldn't be impeached. Okay. And the dean was saying, well, I don't think it really matters, da, 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 da. And so I said, okay, so if I have sex with a student in my office, you're going to be okay with this? He said no. And so never have I won an argument, but to my detriment so quickly. Okay, so anyway, I saw this gentleman.
So my question is, with you were saying your presentation about ranked choice voting, kind of fixing our political polarization, but would it still fix it at the presidential level? Would that gradually also, would they become more mild, or would they still be as polarized as they are now?
I mean, the presidential election is sort of interesting, but what it would allow is instead of now you see this sort of weird battle of the Republicans are desperate to get Cornel West on the ballot everywhere in the hope that it takes votes away from Harris. And the Democrats, ironically, they were fighting Kennedy on the ballot, but increasingly they were thinking, this could really help us because Kennedy had been successfully painted as sort of wacky Trump of a different flavor, shall we say. And so instead of that, you could just vote, if you favored Cornel West, you could vote for Cornel West first, and then you could rank Kamala Harris second. Until you get rid of the Electoral College, though, all of these things become a little tricky. But part of the problem is essentially the primary system that we have now, where Democratic leaders still don't seem able to hold sway in the way you were talking about, but Republicans don't. I remember I thought Trump had destroyed his campaign in 2016 when he went after John McCain wasn't a hero. I thought that day, oh, he just ended his campaign. And it turned out normally that would have been the case. I think at that point we were Trump being transgressive was somehow authentic. Okay, he's not a polished politician. He'll say whatever, okay? And it was also so new that the media were like cats to catnip. I mean, they would show empty stages for 20 minutes on television waiting for him to show up. Okay, and his problem he faces this time is it's like season 9 of a show that should have been canceled at season 6. Okay, it's just we've all seen it. The press is much more able. The press still is having trouble covering it, but covers it, much more bluntly and is less willing to bite to his latest catnip because it's just not new anymore, right? I mean, we've read the book, we've seen the movie. Do we need to do this again? And so that's sort of part of his problem. And his other problem, of course, is now he's the old guy, and he doesn't know how to cope with that. But we'll see though. He has a real attraction to a lot of people.
So what would compel someone like Kennedy, who kind of centered his campaign around being independent, what would compel him to endorse someone like Trump, who's more of like a hardline Republican?
You're asking me to get into the operation of Robert F. Kennedy. I think he's sort of ate one too many Fruit Loops at some point. He's clearly a bizarre person. I read years ago in an article, he was an anti-vaxxer before being an anti-vaxxer was cool, and he went to American Samoa, which I realize may not seem like the most important place, but he went and helped deliver the anti-vax message when they were in the middle of sort of a mumps and measles outbreak. And lo and behold, the outbreak got much worse. Everyone had to quarantine. It was a real problem, and was also an excellent example of why you should get your vaccines. Okay, he's just clearly not. He's clearly a very strange person. Partly because he will just say, "What is he?" At one point he said, I've never said I'm anti-vaccine," and then you can quickly find something that shows where he's anti-vaccine. He's. I think what's interesting, it was clear he'd be sort of like Trump, he's a transactional politician, right? He approached Harris and, could I get a cabinet post? Harris rightly said no because she would lose credibility with everyone. Trump is a transactional guy, so he said yes. And that probably made sense to him to a point. Though honestly, I think Kennedy's impact on the election was already a rounding error to 0, but it's all very close, so the rounding error can matter. But the answer to your question is, I don't know. Yes.
So on the 2-round ranked choice voting model, which in theory I really like, how do you think that interacts with the issue of civic education or seemingly lack thereof in many American voters?
I sort of, I think we need to teach more. In fact, this is the new president of my university would be highly gratified because that's his big new theme, is civic education. And gosh, I've made a living out of never agreeing with deans, as you've just heard. Okay, but I happen to agree with him on this in the sense of, I think civic, both in learning about government, but also in terms of civility. Okay, and increasingly, there's a strain on both the right and the left of, I was talking about this earlier, what I would call admonishment culture, okay? That where, you catch your professor saying something slightly untoward and you rush to complain about them to somebody, okay? And I think we need to be a little more tolerant, even of people's intolerance, okay? America's a big country, people have lots of views. I remember in one of my classes before the same-sex marriage question became such a settled question, I would hold debates on it in my class, and I remember I had this one lovely young man from Utah got up and said, you know, this is against my religion, and it's a little new to me, and I'm still learning about it, and that was about all he said, okay, and you know, and he didn't say anything remotely negative or harsh, and I had 3 students at the end come up to me and said, why didn't you put him down, or why didn't you put him in his place? And I'm like, I asked people to debate something, okay? I shouldn't ask people to debate something and then say, wrong. Particularly, he was like totally civil, right? He's not saying like gay people or whatever, okay? You know, and I think what also the people who were complaining, though they were well-meaning, didn't get is, if you gave that guy a little space in 6 months, he was probably going to be pro same-sex marriage. But if you berated him about his, you know, LDS faith and about being a terrible person, that doesn't work so well most of the time, okay? Politics is often about persuasion, there's one local politician in my area who, she didn't understand when you knock on doors, you can't berate people into submission. I can't knock on, you know, someone's door and tell them, like, you're completely wrong about everything, and here's why, okay? It doesn't work very well. Yeah.
So you spoke positively about ranked choice and about across the board primaries because it provides like an on the paper pressure for coalition building. But some would say our current system still has pressures for coalition building, they're just not written out on the paper. So for instance, the uncommitted movement that we've seen, or the pressures that Donald Trump had to incorporate Nikki Haley, or now RFK Jr. So can you speak to like, do you see those as substantive claims, or is there something fundamentally different about those pressures?
There are pressures, but they're not enough, and I would say the countervailing pressures are much stronger because of the imperative to win primaries. Okay, and so, you know, you can't, you know, increasingly someone who it used to be quite common that a member of Congress would diverge with their party on some sort of major issue, much like Mary Peltola does on gun control, okay? These days, that's like almost heretical, okay? And you like, people are bludgeoned, like, you know, Democratic politicians are bludgeoned not only if they're not pro-choice, but if they're not pro-choice enough, okay? And, you know, I think the pressures to hew to the party line have become so much greater that we need, what I like about ranked choice is it opens it up to the voters much more, and it gives people more of a chance. Sort of like, I saw in my state we have a gubernatorial election. Maryland makes Washington look like Idaho, okay? I mean, in terms of, this is a very left-wing state, okay? Yet we had a Republican governor, and I remember when he was running for re-election, the Democrats decided to run a very left-wing Democrat who promised he would fund everything by, you know, prison reform, which ironically the legislature had already done, but he didn't seem to know. Okay, so essentially we would let people out of prison and we would tax weed, and that would pay for the entire Democratic wish list, from Medicare for all to endless public transit lines to you name it. Okay, and so you had a Republican who'd been in office as a very moderate Republican, also checked by a Democratic legislature, but you know, who essentially you know, hadn't done terribly much offensive, and he won re-election, and partly on the back of, frankly, people like my parents who were diehard Democrats. But I asked my parents, just I was curious, like, oh, who are you gonna vote for? And they said, oh, I think we're gonna vote for Hogan because the other guy's too crazy. And I never heard either of my parents ever say they were gonna vote for a Republican in their life. Now, he's running for Senate, and there's no way they're gonna vote to put him in office as a US Senator, but be that as it may, you know, I think when you have more candidates like that, you create space. And I think we're running out of time.
Go ahead, we have time for one more question for this one.
How about
So with, at the DNC recently, they invited a lot of Republicans to come speak and kind of give speeches about how they felt maybe more at home in the Democratic Party, or that they felt that the Republican Party of Mitt Romney had kind of come to a close. And with independent candidates like RFK kind of getting more airtime in elections, do you think that there will be a push to kind of have maybe a more moderate party, third party, or to have more independent candidates have more access to elections in the future?
Well, the last question you asked really puts up that in fact it's very hard for third parties to get in the ballot, and the two-party duopoly has made it so, and they like it. I think there could be a push, but the reality is we have huge numbers of people who already have strong affects to the two parties. You'd have to have someone who, I think potentially there is room, but what would tend to happen is they would tend to go up and become, oh, we don't know much about them, they're wonderful people, and then we learn more about them and they tend to decline. We saw that a bit with Ross Perot, but that was in, the partisan era was somewhat less. I think what's interesting is ranked choice voting might allow more moderates to actually run in that case, and people would be less afraid to vote for them because you wouldn't necessarily be wasting your vote, and maybe they could win. Okay, and so that another problem which is sort of separate from the whole thing is that since we have sort of single member districts for like the legislature and whatnot, is you tend to get abnormal divisions. Okay, believe it or not, there are Republicans in Seattle. You have to seek them out, you have to hunt them down, and you have to attract them with, I don't know what you do to attract Republicans. Big Trump signs, okay. And similarly, if you go to small rural towns here, there's also some Democrats, but because of winner take all, you almost would never know that east of the Cascades, there's actually quite a few Democrats, and west of, in the SeaTac area, there's quite a few Republicans, because they tend to get outvoted. And that's a bit of a problem in terms of sort of reaching out and feeling neglected. But in statewide races, at least every vote counts, so you can reach across. I think a lot of people would talk about wanting to see but so far all the pushes for that have just failed. Like there's a group called like the Third Way or something, and the problem is fundamentally that they'll tend to pull from one side or the other more and be seen as spoilers. But I just want to close by again thanking the Foley Institute for inviting me to talk to you all, thanking all of you for coming, and really enjoyed speaking to all of you, and have a great rest of your day. It's too beautiful a day to spend time in here.